Good morning, everybody. I think in the interest of time, we should have an almost timely beginning to this event. My name is Jacob Kierkegaard, and I'm a senior fellow here at the Peterson Institute. And it is my great pleasure to welcome everybody to this joint event between the Peterson Institute and the Center for Transatlantic Relations. That's Johns Hopkins SAIS. We are delighted to welcome the Vice President of the Commission, Maros Sefcovic, who is the commissioner responsible for the Energy Union here to the Peterson Institute. I'm going to give the word over to my good friend and, believe it or not, fellow Danish speaker, the managing director of CTR, Anders Simoni, in a few minutes to formally introduce the commissioner. But I just wanted to say that from the perspective of the Peterson Institute, we are really delighted to welcome the commissioner at this particular point in time, because it's really hard to have a substantive discussion about a lot of things today without talking about the things that fall directly under the jurisdiction of the Vice President. I don't think you can meaningfully talk about climate change without touching upon the issues that Vice President Sefcovic deals with. You clearly cannot talk about political, economic stability in Europe without talking about energy security, which is obviously among the core issues of the Energy Union. I certainly don't believe you can, in a continent that has been starved of investment since the beginning of the global financial crisis, really talk about whether it's public or private investments without talking about the energy area. And then finally, as we look forward, which is an issue very dear to the hearts of many here at the Peterson Institute, I don't think you can talk about a meaningful potential transatlantic trade and investment partnership without really getting into the weeds of the energy sector as well. So there is lots to talk about. We look very much forward to it. And Anders, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jacob. Det altid en fornøjelse. Mange tak. That's me showing off my Danish. But I'd like to tell you how pleased I am and honored I am on behalf of Johns Hopkins SAIS, Center for Transatlantic Relationship, to team up with the Peterson Institute to host Maros Sefcovic. I'll be really very brief. Just want to say Vice President Sefcovic is a long-time leader in the European Commission. This is his second term. I'd also like to say that I know that the Vice President is a devoted transatlanticist. He's a great believer in the relationship between the United States and Europe. And is a very strong voice for the new concepts of energy. And he has said it before. He will probably repeat it now, that we are now looking at energy the way we used to look at our military security in the past. So without further ado, I'd like to ask the Vice President to take the floor. He will speak for about 10-15 minutes. Then we will have a small conversation, Jacob and myself, and then we'll go to your questions. Get ready to ask your questions. Thank you so much. Mr. Vice President, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good morning, Excellencies, professors, ladies and gentlemen. It's really a great pleasure to be here at such a prestigious institute who is cooperating so well with Johns Hopkins University, because your Peterson Institute was really the alma mater to many visionaries, the visionaries who changed the course of history, like Madeleine Albright, but also to those who predicted that we will have end of history, like Francis Fukuyama. And now we see how the world is developing very fast, and you know that Europe goes through very turbulent times over the last few years. But if there is one clear and strong feeling in Europe, is that transatlantic relationship is very important, that our cooperation of the two biggest economies, two closest alliance, is absolutely crucial for these times, and we bear a big responsibility for the future of this planet, be it from the environmental point of view, be it from our common values point of view, be it from the economic point of view. And therefore, I was particularly pleased that I could address you this morning, and I was very glad that Andras and his center, together with the Peterson Institute, could organize this conversation with you. And I will promise you, I will not be very, very long, because I know that in this type of the events, the questions and answers periods are usually the most interesting one. But I was asked to tell you a little bit what currently we are doing in Europe with our top priorities, with energy transformation. What does it mean, the energy union, for us and for our partners, and how we would like to work together with the United States to make sure that we will have not only good results in a COP21 conference in Paris, but we will do this inevitable energy transition in the most efficient, cost-effective, and environmentally friendly way. And you know that if you look about our energy cooperation, you just would have to come back to the 50s and just to remind ourselves the fact that how the European Union was actually founded, that it was founded as a coal and steel community in the 50s, because it was at the time seen as a strategic things to do. It was the way how these commodities been perceived, and it was the way how to make sure that if we in Europe are able to cooperate on these super strategic assets, it would bring us to the closer relationship, and it would definitely prevent us from having another war on the European continent. And you know that idea was actually very successful, that really our relationship grew up, our interactions in Europe multiplied, and in the end that we eventually managed to unify the European continent again. I have to tell you that being from Slovakia, at that time Czechoslovakia, when I heard 30 years ago Ronald Reagan in Berlin asking through the airwaves, at that time Soviet Secretary General Mr. Gorbachev, tear down the wall, I didn't believe it would happen so quickly. At the time I was a student who was kind of hoping to become once a diplomat, and I knew that wall very well, because I'm from Bratislava and I was growing up just 2 kilometers from that Iron Curtain. And I was taking my bike rides along the Danube when I was going for my volleyball training, and I saw it every day, and you wouldn't believe how you can get used to that thing. We just thought that this would be like this forever, that it will never change, that we will see the lights, the cars, the people on the other side of that fence across the Danube, but we would never be allowed to get there. They will be locked in, and at that time such a famous anecdote was also said that son is asking the father that, Daddy, and who is behind the bars? And the answer was, us, my son, us. And this is how it was felt, and this is why we in Central Europe been so enchanted when we saw that not only the Iron Curtain was removed, but we joined the European Union, we removed the border controls, and we can enjoy the common space, which now is under a lot of stress, and we have to do a lot to protect it. But the fact that Europe has such an important role to play for maintaining the peace on our continent and to project this positive soft power also to our neighbors was, I think, very key for the economic developments in all European countries. And if you know the Europe well, if you compare the new member states now, and if you kind of bear in mind what was the situation 10, 15, 20 years ago, you would have to agree that you wouldn't recognize most of the cities, you wouldn't recognize the statistics, and you wouldn't believe that this is the same country you visited 10 or 15 years ago. So the cooperation, integration, and that European and transatlantic approach to our common relationship are bringing these positive results. And I think we just have to remind ourselves sometimes what was the journey we crossed, what was the progress we achieved, and just to reassure ourselves that the recipe we have is a good one, We just have to work for it. We just have to remind ourselves of the importance of it, even in the situations when the times is difficult. I can tell you that when we've been going through the most difficult moments of the economic crisis a couple of years ago, how thrilled we have been in the European Commission when we as a European Union got a Nobel Prize for peace. And I was very honored because I was invited to be in the delegations to come to Oslo and to be part of the ceremony when this Nobel Prize was given to the European Union. And I know that probably never ever in my life I could say goodbye to my wife in a way, goodbye honey, I'm going to get my Nobel. And it was something which was such a boost of encouragement, boost of confidence in our project, which we very much needed. And if you look at it, we also deserve it, because Europe, despite all the turbulent moments, is always looking the solutions in the consensus, in the mutual cooperation, and we always are very pleased where we can have that strong relationship confirmed and reconfirmed across the Atlantic Ocean as well. Coming to why we felt we need to do something totally different in the field of energy and energy transformation. I think we have seen over the last couple of years that we just had to say goodbye to this traditional view of how you perceive the energy as such, how you produce it, how you distribute it, and how you consume it. It was quite clear that with that narrow perspective, you cannot incorporate all the challenges which have been brought by the climate change. These traditional models be not based on including these new intermittent renewable sources. It was quite clear that our big incumbent energy companies were not ready for this dramatic transition which is about to take place. And also the feeling of the population that we want to live in cleaner, greener environment, that we are ready to save the energy, we are ready to go for more energy efficiency, was in Europe, and I believe in the States and the globe, never so present as it is right now. I think that also the fact that now fewer and fewer people deny that there is real climate change is also the factor which is helping us to build the necessary political momentum for completion of this energy transition and for what I hope would be very positive historic results we will achieve in Paris. Unfortunately, it took us quite too many weather-related climate change-caused natural disasters. You here in the States never seen so many hurricanes and tornadoes. We in Europe never had so many floods. And when I was in Africa, I never seen such a vast territories completely devastated by the drought. And in Asia, you never had so many news coming from that part of the world about monsoons, typhoons, and the hundreds of thousands of lives lost. So now I think we clearly feel that we need to do something, and we need to do it in an intelligent, smart way to make sure that we will save our planets for the future generation. On top of it, I also have to say that when these questions been kind of surfacing on the political debate tables in Europe, it was quite clear that especially after the geopolitical conflict in eastern Ukraine, the issue of energy security became very, very present and very clear and very vivid for all political leaders in Europe. And there was a decision that let's go back to the basics. Let's look at what have been the recipes which help us to build the European Union, and which have been the core principles behind any successful European cooperation. And that was the way how to integrate our policies. That was the imperative to work together on many of these challenges. And therefore, the decision was taken, let's build energy union. And let's build it in this new modern way which would cover the energy and climate issues in a holistic way, where we would cover energy security issues, but we would also work very hard to finally complete internal energy market and not to have these 28 different energy markets in Europe. To make sure that we would use the energy efficiency as a new source of energy, because it would help us with the decarbonization of our economy and with meeting our ambitious climate goals. And let's use what we are so strong at, our research and innovation, and use the financial instrument to actually boost those technologies which could help us to achieve all that necessary change. And we delivered on the clear expectations from our public and from our political leaders, and offer the way how to do it. We presented the strategy on the energy union in Europe. We developed the roadmap, the action plan, which consists of legal actions, which would be completed from the Commission side by the end of the year, so we can transform our proposals into the valid legislation after the negotiations with our member states and the European Parliament. And we also been working on the tracks which are very important also for this audience, because we've been working very much on energy security, helping our neighbors like Ukraine to make sure that they will get the gas supplies also for the next winter, and that we are able to help them thanks to the close cooperation with our American partners and international financial institutions to make sure that adequate financing for this gas purchase are secured. We've been working very closely with our strategic energy partners like Norway, like our Mediterranean partners, like United States, but we've been also developing the new relationship to make sure that we can get the new sources of energy coming through the new routes to Europe, like the Southern Gas Corridor pipeline, which will bring the new Caspian gas to Europe before 2020. We believe that Europe, being such a big market, when better organized and when stronger present on the international scene, should definitely get better, more favorable and fairer treatment. We pay $1 billion per day for our energy imports. We are the good client, good customer. We pay on time. We pay in hard currency, and therefore we believe we deserve a good treatment, and we deserve a good price. But if it comes to the energy union, we are very much conscious that we cannot look only for ourselves in the European Union. Therefore, I said many times that for us, energy union doesn't stop at the European Union's border, because we see how countries like Ukraine, which I already mentioned, but also Moldova, Western Balkan countries, Mediterranean partners, want to be part of this exercise and part of this project, because we know that only together we can guarantee the reliable, secure work of our energy systems and make sure that we would go through this very important transition period together. How this would be done in the concrete terms. What I mean when I said that by the end of the next year we would deliver on most what we promised under the umbrella of the Energy Union. We are going to deliver such a 3 very important legislative packages, and don't worry, I'm not going to get into the great details. But the first one would be very much focused on the security of energy supplies, where we want to revise our directive on the security of gas supply. We are going to present new EU LNG strategy. This is the topic I'm kind of raising in every meeting we have with our American partners from Congress, from Senate, or from the administration, because I believe that this is one of the platforms where we really can work together, and where really Europe is getting open for the LNG business, and where I think that we could really complement our strengths, our interests, and where America can play a very important geostrategic role. In the summer, we are going to work on transposition, or what I believe would be positive outcome of the climate conference in Paris. We are going to revise our framework for energy efficiency, for reduction of so-called non-ETS sector, meaning decarbonization of transport, better energy efficiency in our buildings, and reducing of greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture. And then in the autumn, that would be the last big package we are going to propose, which will be oriented around the new proposal for the new electricity market design in Europe. That would be landmark legislation because we need to remove still a lot of barriers we have on our electricity markets, be it technical barriers, be it administrative barriers, because our regulators still like to talk with different languages, using different methodologies, using different codes, and kind of preventing that free flow of electricity across borders in Europe. We are going to enhance the powers of the Agency for Cooperation of the European Regulators, which is responsible for for the improvement of the cross-border flows and for the convergence of the European methodologies if it comes to network courts and to these methodologies. And I believe that once this all is on the table, then in 2017 we want to ask our member states. So now member states tell us how you see yourself in the energy union, how you want to contribute to the success of the project. Please develop your own national energy and climate plans within that framework which we've been developing for you under the umbrella of the Energy Union. You know what is the outcome of the Paris. You know what is the framework proposed by the European Commission. You agreed to all of these key parameters, and now we would like to see your input, your contributions to this common effort, because I know very well that we cannot build energy union in Brussels. We need to build it in Prague, in Bratislava, in Vienna, in Berlin, in our member states, and the member states must have a feeling of strong ownership of this process, because that would be absolutely key to the success of this very important transformation. If you allow me, just to conclude on also two very important elements. One is TTIP. I'm a strong believer in TTIP. I was in the European Commission when it was proposed for the first time. We did all assessments how beneficial it would be for the both sides of the Atlantics, how much we can profit if two biggest economies would be actually linked together in this strong economic partnership. What it will do for the positive global standard setting, how our economies would benefit from that, how any new technical innovation which should be accepted by both of us would immediately become global standard. And I think that this is something which we have to bear in mind. I know how difficult it is on the both sides of the Atlantic, but I think we shouldn't lose that strategic vision of that price which would be there in kind of cementing even more our transatlantic partnership, at the same time creating a lot of new business opportunities and creating these new possibilities how to project the positive power of developed standard making to the world. I think that we have to bear it in mind, and I hope that we will be able to win that political debate, and we will be able to conclude these negotiations with a positive results, which definitely would be beneficial for the both sides of the Atlantic. If you allow me, just the last word, and again on COP21. And this is just because I just would like to appreciate how much we in Europe value the strong commitment we feel from the United States, from President Obama, from Secretary Kerry, from Secretary Moniz, with whom we are going to discuss all range of issues, including how we would coordinate our positions before that conference in Paris, and that strong call for doing the right things in Paris. Because I think that we have the all necessary proof that the time is running fast. We have the technology which would help us to tackle these biggest challenges. And now I think we have a political will, political momentum, and clear expectations from our citizens that they want us to succeed. And therefore, I am very glad that I had the possibility and privilege to address you this morning at the prestigious Peterson Institute. I really would like to thank you very much for the interest in Europe, in transatlantic relationship, in the energy union, and I'm very much looking forward to your questions and to your commentaries. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Vice President. That was very comprehensive, and you really managed to cover a lot of ground. But I guess I would start my questions by going back to the point of energy security. You mentioned that there is obviously ongoing negotiations and et cetera with a host of external suppliers, Norway, Algeria, the new Caspian reserves. So in one way you could say that, well, in terms of energy security, diversification is obviously better, and the more pipelines, the merrier, if you like. But at the same time, I think we also know that it's not necessarily the case that all pipelines, the more pipelines are better and all pipelines are equal. And therefore, I would like you to perhaps more specifically address the issues related to one particular pipeline, namely Nord Stream 2, which is, of course, viewed by some as just another way for Europe to access, in this case, Russian gas reserves, and that would be good. But also, of course, in the views of many others, not least in Central and Eastern Europe, is in fact a symbol of what is wrong or what needs to be remedied in the energy union. Namely that the interests of some countries, for instance your native Slovakia, may not be taken fully into consideration when you make these infrastructure projects that obviously will be on the ground for decades to come.
Thank you very much for that question, and I think you very rightly sum up by one word what we mean by higher energy security. It's very clearly the answer is the diversification. And the fact is that I think when we started to be very serious about energy union, about better integration of South, East Europe, Western Balkans, our neighborhood countries into our energy union, we have also seen such a flourish of propositions coming from Russia and from Gazprom. I mean, after the cancellation of the South Stream project, we've seen the proposals for Turkish Stream, Greek Stream, and now we have a proposal for the Nord Stream. The fact is that the quite impressive consortium of big European companies signed that initial agreement with the Gazprom, and then the fact is that we are still trying to understand that commercial viability of this project. Why? Because currently the transport capacities for Russian gas being shipped to Europe are used at a little bit more than 50%. At the same time, we already did our estimate how much gas we would need by 2030, and took into the equation all our plans in energy efficiency, in greenhouse gas reductions, and stronger presence of renewables in our energy mix. And our conclusion was that we would need more or less the same quantity of gas as today, between 380 billion cubic meters to 450 billion cubic meters. So even that capacity could be covered by the current gas infrastructure. So therefore, of course, once such a project of such magnitude is being proposed, you ask, why do you need that excessive capacity? And of course, because of that nature of the conflict in the eastern Ukraine and because of different statements which have been made in the course of the last year, of course, one of the conclusions you could very, very easily made was that this project has several objectives. One, which is officially stated, to supply Europe with additional Russian gas, but second, for creating the option that the Ukraine could be bypassed. And then, of course, we have to ask ourselves the question: what would happen if this really would become true? How much money Ukraine would lose, up to $2 billion from the transit revenues? What it will do to the current situation with the reverse flow supplies to Ukraine, which saved the Ukrainians up to $3 billion just over the last year. Because if you do not have the transit, you do not have the reverse flows. And of course, how the gas balance would be changed in Central and Southeastern Eastern Europe, not speaking about the financial losses. So this project has a lot of very, I would say, complex political ramification, and it has a lot of also regulatory questions, because it's quite clear that if it comes to the project of this magnitude, it's our duty in the European Commission to make sure that the European law is fully respected. This is third package, where you have very clear rules concerning independent transmission system operator, unbundling, very clear public procurement rules, and of course all the environmental legislation which would have to be respected. Therefore, we proposed the German regulator to engage as quickly as possible to make sure that all these frameworks, all these legal obligations are well understood, and then, of course, we will see what would be the future course of action. But we are very conscious of the fact that in the case of South Stream, the insistence of the very rigorous application of the European law was put in place. And I know that we have to do the same with this project, because we would be under tremendous political and legal scrutiny. And therefore, I think it's very important to kind of announce it very clearly that if it comes to this project, that we will be studying it very carefully, and all regulatory obligations will have to be respected.
Anders?
Yeah, let me press you a little bit on this Nord Stream 2. This town is brutally honest sometimes, and what we call think tank row is extremely brutal sometimes. The real worry here is, I think it's summed up by something that we have seen on the Gazprom website, which suggests that Nord Stream 2 is extremely important for a secure supply of gas to Western Europe. That's what it says, which suggests that they do not understand that you are working on a united European market, that the future of Europe is together, that the future of Europe is a common strategic thinking on energy. So this is one thing. The second thing is, there is a worry in this town that some member states of the European Union are ready to, as they say in the United States, throw some other countries under the bus. Meaning that they don't really care about the situation that some of the smaller countries are in. So I'd like to press you on this, and I think this bridges to the other question I would have, and I'm sure others are interested in hearing your views on, is the future of not just U.S. LNG in Europe, but also the future of U.S. oil exports to Europe. And how do you see this? Why is this so damn important to you, overseeing the the energy union? Why is it so terribly important in terms of stabilizing the European supplies, in terms of energy security? But there's something more to it, to make sure that the Russians do see a clear competition which abides by the rules, which is transparent, which you can count on, which is not prone to corruption, and I don't want to go on. So, Mr. Vice President, I hope you will not hate Sison, the Peterson Institute, for these questions.
No. I always like the conversation with Andras because he knows how to make you feel comfortable on the podium with with a tough question. Just thought that I somehow managed, to kind of dance around it, and he brought me back into it. But this is what all these debates are all about, and thank you very much for that, Andras. I think that what I think we are clearly seeing now, also in Europe, that a little bit what you see also in this world of energy. We see global competition for the market share. We see it in oil business very clearly, and with the strong arrival of LNG, I think that we also see this gradual transformation of gas becoming global commodity as well. I think that times of long-term contracts are over. We see that more and more gas hub pricing, stock exchange pricing is more and more relevant for any business operations you do in Europe and elsewhere. For example, when we've been negotiating this trilateral gas deal for this winter with Ukrainians and Russians, of course, one of the key issues was what would be the price. If we secure or help to secure the financing for Ukrainian partners, what would be the price they would pay for the supplies of Russian gas for this winter? And then it was quite clear, and I think that that was the issue which we managed to resolve relatively quickly, because once you have a possibility to diversify your supplies, so it's quite natural that you should pay the price, which is the price of the region. So in the end, the formula was fine, where Ukraine would pay more or less the same price as Poland. It just shows how the competition and possibility of diversification of supply plays the key role in setting the appropriate price. And then, of course, that worries, which I think been voiced not only by the European Commission, but also which was very clearly reflected in the common decision of the foreign affairs ministers of all European countries, which clearly stated that the preservations, the maintaining of the transit routes through Ukraine is of a big political importance. For the European Union, found finally also its response in Russian side, which is now reassuring us that Nord Stream is not constructed or conceived or proposed to bypass Ukraine. This is just to cover the gap in Western European countries, which would be caused by lower extraction rates coming from Netherlands and from the North Sea. So I think that we at least managed to deliver at this point, but as you rightly pointed out, this is the project of a big political sensitivity with enormous regulatory complexity, and it has external and internal political aspects, and therefore I always say in this context that in Europe we always have to look for the solutions which would offer comprehensive energy security for all member states and not just for few. And this is something on which we have to work within the Energy Union with our partners, and where, of course, the respect for the EU rules and better the diversification of supply could play very, very important role. Sometimes I kind of half seriously and half jokingly say that if everybody would treat Europe as Norway, you would have no problem with anything, you know. So let's hope that through this, I would say, legal framework, rules-based system, bigger competition on our market, more liquid performance of our energy markets in Europe because of better interconnections and removal of the barriers, we would really arrive at the situation where we wouldn't have to worry from whom we are getting the energy supplies, because we will have wide choice, strong competition in our market, and liquidity within the Europe, which would allow us not to worry about these things anymore in the future.
The oil, the lifting of the oil ban in the U.S. and LNG, in your thinking, how does this fit?
I think, of course, we are very, very happy that when we raised this question with the Secretary Moniz the couple of months ago, and so he was telling about it. But look, you know, I signed all this export license request for LNG, which ended up on my table. So now I think it's more than 90 million cubic meters of LNG up for export as from the next year, which I think is quite important volume of gas if you take into account that we in Europe consume in 1 year 400 BCM. And I know that this is the gas which is not there only for us, that it's for global exports. So we see this as a good beginning. But to be quite honest, we are trying in all our negotiations with our partners to make sure that if we are signing any kind of economic agreements, to be very clear that we should remove all kind of restriction on the export of raw materials. And we are negotiating very hard with the Gulf countries. We've been pushing very much the same clause in our agreements with our African partners. I think we are having the same battle together with the United States in WTO, because we simply think that the ban on raw materials, on export of energy components just shouldn't take the place, and definitely not between two such a close allies like Europe and the United States. Therefore, we are playing so much for having energy chapter under the TTIP. Therefore, we hope that these restrictions would be lifted, even though that I know that it's rather sensitive. And yesterday I had a chance to speak to two senators who presented me two very opposing views on this issue. So I know that it's a big political debate here in the States, but I just would like to say that it's big business opportunity for American businesses in Europe, and it would have, of course, the strong energy security meaning for Europeans, because I have seen the Twitter account of Russian Ministry of Energy after the first Saudi ship bringing the oil cargo to Poland. What kind of signal it was for the competition, for the pricing, for, I would say, overall impact on how the business models of exporting the energy, oil and gas to Europe been affected just by the first arrival of the Saudi oil ship. We have seen what the Klaipeda LNG terminal did for the prices of the gas in that country. The drop of 30% almost immediate. So therefore, I think that here you would have to understand that what we want to do is open Europe to more energy imports, to open new strategic alliances for diversification of the energy supply to our member states, because we believe that it would bring us better security and more competitive prices.
Shall we go to the audience immediately? Your choice.
Yeah, well, actually, let me take my prerogative as host and ask you one more question before we open it up. And I want to come back to the issue of climate change. And I would like to ask you, I mean, we hear everybody says, look, the Paris summit, it cannot fail, and it's going to be a success, et cetera, which to me, it tastes a little bit like in the run-up to the Copenhagen summit some years ago, which was obviously a disaster, in my opinion. So what is, from the perspective of Europe, what is a successful COP21? What is a meaningful contribution from this whole process? Is it just that you sort of bring together all the new national contributions, including from some of the large emerging markets, China and India, et cetera, that basically say, is it enough to say, well, we get everybody to sign off on doing what they would have done anyway, based on their various national, political, economic constraints? Or certainly, as you can probably hear, I would argue that you need to do a lot more to credibly justify this process and certainly call it a success. And so what is Europe's goal here, and what will it take, not least from large emerging markets, but also, of course, from the United States, which has been a reluctant player in many ways in this issue?
No, thank you very much for this question. We could look at it, of course, from different perspective. I mean, if you look the current debate, where very often that emerging deal from the negotiators' sessions for Paris Summit is compared with what was agreed in Kyoto. Where are we right now, and where we ended up in Kyoto? Currently, we have more than 150 countries pledging their national contributions. After Kyoto, we had 35 countries. These pledges are currently covering more than 90% of the global greenhouse gas emissions. After Kyoto, it was 13%. So here I would say, see that this is a much more larger effort that we are really now talking about the agreement, which would really have the global ramifications. What the Europe would like to see, of course, we very much would like to see to have very ambitious, legally binding agreement, which would clearly keep us below that 2 degrees of Celsius mark, which we know would be the level which would bring environmental catastrophic consequences to our planet. What we expect would happen, and we are working very hard to make this as a success, and therefore I'm very much looking forward to discussion with the Secretary Moniz, just to compare the notes, how they see the progress, how we see it from the European side. When we look at the current assessments of that so-called INDCs, these national pledges, so at this stage, the analysis is telling us that we will most probably not make it below the 2 degrees of Celsius, and therefore what we need to do is to work with this new positive attitude that we actually have the majority of the countries of this world, that we have more than 90% of the global emissions covered, and that we are actually be looking at the Paris, not at something like which is at the end of the road, but at the new beginning, how to improve the global governance on our climate policies on the global scale. So what we would like to see, we would like to see in that final agreement long-term goal, which would guarantee us that we would make it below this 2 degrees Celsius level, that we would have a commitment like the Europe is proposing, the clear indication that by 2050 we should reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by 60%. We would like to see the establishment of the new dynamics, new mechanism, which would allow us, let's say, every 5 years to go for the stock-taking exercise where we would assess how we respect our commitments, if that arrangement we will have in Paris is working, if we are delivering, and if not, would allow us to adopt additional measures to make sure that we will keep the positive developments of these climate policies. And the third very important element for us would be just much more precise and trustworthy monitoring and verification mechanism, that we can actually check and monitor if the pledges, if the commitments, if these national contributions are respected, that we would be able to compare them and to know if everybody is really delivering or not. And then, of course, the crucial issues for many countries in the developing world would be also the issue of financing, where I think that we from the developed world would have to do a lot. I was quite encouraged, I have to say, by the recent OECD study, which says that currently, if you look at how much of the investment comes from developed to the developing world to tackle the climate change, is around it's more than $60 billion. Of course, we are still far from this $100 billion, which was the commitment taken some time ago and should be reached by 2020. But it shows that we can make it, that we are on track, and we just need to learn how to use also this investment, this financial assessment in a smarter, more efficient way, which would help also the countries in Africa and Asia to embrace this new technology, to introduce these new modern policies which would allow them to mitigate the consequences of the global warming, but at the same time also to introduce the measures which also will make it possible for them to contribute more to the fight against climate change.
All right. Well, I think it's time to open it up for the audience. There are several opportunities. There is a mic in the center here that you can go to, and if you sit in the front, we have a traveling mic up here. So please go to the mic, introduce yourself, and please ask a brief question. Thank you.
My name's Thomas Grindley. Some time ago, it was in the news that Germany was ending its reliance on nuclear power. On the face of it, this seems to be irrational. What is the status of this program, and how does it fit into the European Energy Union? What is the current proportion of nuclear energy in Europe's energy mix?
Energiewende.
Yeah. Thank you very much for this question. As I was already saying a few times since I arrived yesterday that nuclear energy is a topic which is hotly debated in Europe. We have 14 member states which clearly want to continue with the nuclear energy. We have new plans for building up new reactors in Finland, Slovakia, in UK. Other countries are continuing to use the nuclear energy as one of low carbon source. And currently, the nuclear power is very important and very strongly present in our energy mix. It's around 20 in the energy mix. It represents around 20-25%. So it's quite clear that this debate would continue because we have the countries like Austria, which clearly decided not to use nuclear power anymore, and it's very critical about nuclear power. And we have, of course, the Germany, which decided to phase out nuclear sector and replace it with very massive arrival of renewables. So they have this Energiewende process, which have seen the strong arrival of solar, wind, biomass power in Germany. Really, the arrival of many new technologies which are helping to integrate these renewables into the national energy grid. But at the same time, there are still lots of issues which you would have to resolve on the European levels, because if you talk to Polish and Czech partners, they will tell you that sometimes when you have too much wind and very strong sun in Germany, that it brings a lot of volatility to the grids in Poland and in Germany. And of course, the response to it is better management of our networks, stronger internal networks within the Germany, which is now being built, especially from north to the south, from northern Germany to Bavaria. And we would like to help better integration of the renewables also by our new electricity market design, because this is exactly what we have to tackle to find better responses, how to integrate this strong arrival of renewables into the energy systems of Europe. Thank you.
I'm Haigu Garadze with Argus Media. Mr. Vice President, you mentioned European natural gas demand is stable through 2030, and pipeline capacity is sufficient. There is more LNG entering the market. Given that, is there any pipeline project that has commercial viability for bringing more supply into Europe? And if not, how does the Union subsidize the risk of building more capacity that you mentioned is going to be built into southern parts of the Union?
Yeah, thank you very much for your question. So I think that one project which clearly is commercial viable and which already secured more than $40 billion of US dollars investment is Southern Gas Corridor, and it's a big project, almost 3,000 kilometers of the pipes bringing Caspian gas to Europe, and which will be completed before 2020. Then, of course, you have quite a few projects, especially in Southeast Europe and in Western Balkans, where we clearly need much better interconnectedness, where we need more interconnectors. And unfortunately, very often it takes us in Europe very, very long years before such a cross-border projects are completed. How we want to help to make sure that our countries are better linked together and that it doesn't take us such a long time to build them is that we introduce the system of so-called Project of Common Interest. It's a PCI list, and which second edition would be adopted within a couple of weeks in the middle of November, where we, after our analysis, are presenting the list, the priorities. We discuss it with the member states, and then we are pursuing together the adequate legal frameworks where we are pleading with our member states to accelerate all the permitting procedures, and where we are also trying to make sure that proper financing is secured for these projects, because some of the projects are on the level of commercial viability. As I very often quote one member of the European Parliament, he said that with some of these projects in the field of energy security, you have it like with a military airport. It's not commercially viable, but you need it. And in this particular case, very often you are on these borderline cases, and therefore we came up with the initiative of Juncker Investment Fund, which is projected to help exactly these borderline cases. When you have the commercial interest, then it could be viable, but still the investors are worried about the potential risk, about the potential first losses. And therefore, we would like to use this Juncker Investment Fund to make sure that the investors are reassured. Here, the European Investment Bank is ready to go into the project with us. Commission supports it. Member states are for it. So if there is any risk, if there are any eventual first losses, so it will be Juncker Investment Fund who takes the coverage for these first losses. And this is how we hope to restore a little bit more normal investment climate in Europe, because we are still heavily underinvested and we still didn't make it to the investors' rates and to the level of the investment we had before the last economic crisis. And you feel it the most in the energy, transport and ICT infrastructure. Therefore, we would like to use this combination of legal framework, prioritization of the project with the possibility of providing better financing for the project promoters, that we would have a much more accelerated and much more successful process than it is until today.
Thank you.
Hi, Emily Meredith from Energy Intelligence. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how energy issues fit into the TTIP, like you brought up, and in particular if there's room for oil to be part of those discussions, since that's obviously separate from the U.S. lifting its own domestic ban towards all countries.
Thank you very much for that question. I'll be very happy if I could give you a precise answer to this. But the fact is that currently we have another round of the TTIP negotiations taking place in Miami. We kind of hope that all that negotiating power after the completion or Trans-Pacific deal will now would be devoted to the negotiation with us on the TTIP, and we are quite clear on the fact that we very much would like to have the energy chapter included into the TTIP, because you know the rule here in the States that when you have a free trade agreement with your partner, so then usually all these restrictions and export bans are not applicable, and that I think would be the most elegant solution, especially if you are talking about the deal of this magnitude, two biggest economies working together on the free trade. But I understand that it's a very sensitive question here for the domestic policies, and we presented our proposals, and we would now expect, of course, the response from American partners. What we see as I would say encouraging sign was this licensing process for the export of LNG. Even as I said, that we know that it's for the global markets. It's not for Europe only. But I think it's just the first clear sign that U.S. Is entering the energy global markets as a new energy superpower, and I hope that this would be developed, this would be consolidated, and that it would find the appropriate reflection in the EU-US partnership.
Thank you. Patricia Schuker for Pipeline Oil and Gas in Dubai. Amos Hochstein, who's the Special Envoy of International Energy Affairs, recently visited Athens, and he mentioned how Greece can be part of a solution for Europe in terms of energy cooperation and security. And I wanted to ask you, how do you see Greece as a potential guarantor of energy security and contributor in the European energy security framework? Thank you.
I think Greece is clearly very crucial partner in many of the projects I was referring to. Of course, the Southern Gas Corridor should go through Greece. Of course, the interconnector between Bulgaria and Greece is one of the, I would say, key components, or what could become the pipeline, which is called by some the vertical corridor, bringing the gas from the south actually up to the north and to the Balkan countries. Greece is the country in the Mediterranean with LNG capabilities and very close to these new sources of gas, which have been recently discovered around Egypt, around Cyprus, close to Israel. So they are, together with Italy, absolutely key countries for development, what we call the project of the Mediterranean gas hub. So therefore, we are paying so much attention to the development of this project in Greece. And when we established that group, and we use that abbreviation CASEC, which goes for the connectivity for Southeast and Central Europe. So the project of the interconnector between Greece and Bulgaria was clearly one of the top priority projects. We managed since February until July, which is in European and which is in European style in a record time, to get 15 countries, EU and non-EU countries, to agree on top priority 7 projects. So it means that not each country has a project in there, but the project which would be key to unlock the possibility for each country from this region to have access to at least 3 different sources of gas. That's our headline goal. This is what we want to achieve for each of these countries, to make sure that they would have diversified supply of gas and that the energy security would be enhanced. And for that, the project like the Greek-Bulgarian interconnectors and several projects around Bulgaria, Romania, and Serbia are the key to make sure that we would have that appropriate network in this part of Europe.
Why don't you ask a question? And then I'll have a final one question. We have about a few minutes to conclude. Please.
My name is Arnaud Limlet from the company Exmar. We are an oil and gas service provider, mainly in LNG. You mentioned that in the new framework, you're going to be focusing on security of energy, mainly gas supply and new LNG strategy. My question comes more on the economical side of the viability of the projects. You clearly mentioned that the idea is to have alternative sources of supply than the actual sources, mainly Gazprom. As soon as we will bring LNG vessels, the regasification units in the eastern part of Europe, that will drive the actual price down, clearly. And Gazprom will take a strategic decision on reducing the price. So how do you foresee the viability of those regasification projects, because the costs are high? And you also mentioned that the LNG strategy is more short-term rather than long-term. So it means that all investment that we will do might be not economical on the long run. So has the economical union or the countries is foreseeing subsidizing those projects, or how you foresee the impact?
No. Concerning the LNG strategy, we would like to see it as a short term. I would say the whole energy union concept is working with I would say timeline up to 2030. This is what I think you can kind of reasonably, fairly forecast, predict what would be needed. This is where we are having a clear internally agreed goals, what we like to achieve in greenhouse gas reduction, in renewables, in energy efficiency, and this is the framework within which we want also to introduce the LNG strategy. So it's not a strategy for a year or two, but it's strategy within that perspective. And as I said, our estimate is that by 2030 we would need between 380 to 450 billion cubic meters of gas, because we would see that gas would gradually become as a energy medium which would be very compatible with a stronger presence of intermittent renewables on the market. And if it comes to the LNG and to the gas pricing here, we would like to see that the Europeans are paying the fair price. What I mean by fair price? By fair price, I mean the price which would be comparable to the price you pay on the global markets. This is what we are also telling to the Russian suppliers, that what we believe should be fair pricing in Europe is the prices which would reflect the gas hub prices in Austria, in Netherlands, in the UK, which are such 3 major gas hubs where they have this pricing mechanism quite well developed and quite well respected, because this is transparent. We know where this price came from. We know what to expect. It's much more predictable in this way, and this is what I think could be further reinforced, where we would see that also external suppliers would respect the same rules, and we would apply the same, I would say, fair, transparent pricing mechanism on the European energy market. So this would be the best answer I can give to you, because I think that if it comes to the energy prices, of course, in Europe, what we like to see is the clear market forces in play.
Okay, the last question is an easy one. Your comment on Iran, and as we lift the sanctions, what is going to happen?
I think we see already that lots of things is happening, and I think that the deal which was struck with Iran also clearly confirmed how important that EU, US, in this case, diplomatic cooperation is important, that together we can really achieve a lot of things and very important diplomatic breakthroughs. And I think that the fact that Iran is coming back to the global energy market is, I think, one of the factors affecting the oil price on the global markets. If it comes to the gas, there I think the situation would be a little bit different, because we know that Iran is a big consumer of the gas. The economy, the transport systems are very much based on the gas, and currently the gas reserves are located in the south of Iran. So in the northern territories of Iran, they're actually importing the gas from Turkmenistan. So I think it would really take quite some effort and quite some investment to actually create the ability of the Iran to export gas, and most probably at the beginning in the form of LNG. So I would say that first we'll see Iranian oil on the global markets, and with the gas, I'm sure that it will take quite some time before this will happen.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Vice President. I think we have reached the end of our program. On behalf of the Peterson Institute, I would like to, and I'm sure the Center for Transatlantic Relations, I would like to thank you very much for your very illuminating and candid remarks on a wide set of issues. And we wish you the best of luck in your upcoming tasks here in Washington, in Brussels, and not least in Paris. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for coming. Thank you.